You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and it's time for another Steamy Spotlight interview. Today's episode marks the start of our Cocktober reading, and you might have noticed that episodes will be on the lighter side this month. November will be the same, and that is because I am gearing up for the Boobies and Newbies annual holiday special, the 12 Days of Boobsmas. Now, I know what everybody's thinking. We just got pumpkin spice lattes back, and look, I am here for all of it. You will not find somebody who loves fall as much as I do, so just keep in mind, Boobsmas is coming. It'll be here before you know it. So we meet again. The latest book from stand-up comedian turned author Suzanne Park has absolutely nothing to do with vamps, wares, or shifters. However, it is a delicious read about food, friends, and family. And if that doesn't scream fall, I don't know what does. So please join me in welcoming the author herself, Suzanne Park.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here and see you again because people might not know this. This is actually our second time interviewing. The first time just happened to be for Reader Seeks Romance. So if anybody listening remembers our episode with Liz Donatelli, Liz hosts a show on YouTube called Reader Seeks Romance, and I was lucky enough to be invited to co-host an episode where we interviewed Suzanne, and we found out a lot of fun facts about you, I feel like, during that episode, Suzanne.
It was a ton of fun, and I was really pulling from way back in my high school days trying to remember some of these fun facts about me. But I thought you were just now setting me up for a "so we meet again" joke, and it didn't.
Oh my god, and I missed it. Shame on me.
I was waiting for it.
To show you I haven't had enough coffee this morning. Like, it should have just been Suzanne and I interviewed previously on Reader Seeks Romance, and Suzanne, so we meet again.
Right.
There it is.
There it is.
Whoop, there it is. Yeah, that was my bad. Oh God, and I'm a writer. I should have seen that coming. I do comedy. I should have known. I should have known. We've already gotten off to a terrible start.
Or a wonderful start, because now we're going to be firing off these jokes now.
Zippy. There's so much pressure. Pressure is on. Well, Suzanne, I mean, I mentioned fall, and obviously your book is by no means a paranormal, shifter, werewolf-ridden romance. However, I'd love to start out by asking if you have any fall favorite activities, eats, or treats, because I, for one, am so excited that fall is finally here.
I know this is a controversial topic, but I am a pumpkin spice latte fan. I know it causes a lot of debate on the internet. I also do like peppermint mocha. There always seems to be this
Me too.
Struggle between the pumpkin spice people and the peppermint people, but I like both. I am an equal opportunity type of flavor person.
See, I just figured whoever liked pumpkin spice lattes probably also liked peppermint mochas, because that's like the basic way of life. Like, I just thought that was inherent, but I didn't realize there was so much animosity between these flavored coffee concoction drinkers.
I think you're very much for one or the other, and there are very few people I love both equally. And so I've had this debate amongst several friends and even people seen it online. So we'll see how this, maybe there's a new spice. You said that there there might be other flavors.
There is, as of this season, there is a caramel, I think it's a caramel apple macchiato at Starbucks, and I don't know what all the other chains are doing just because Starbucks is closest to me. When I lived in the Midwest, Dunkin' was like my go-to, but Yeah, Starbucks is definitely closer, and I haven't given the apple macchiato a try yet, but I love like apple picking and like apple pies. Like the fall for me is just as much about apples as it is about pumpkins.
Agreed. I love apple picking. I've done that only
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 times, but I always end up liking it. First of all, because the apples are not these huge apples; they're usually these reasonably sized apples, so a normal
Right.
person can eat it, finish it, and not feel wasteful. And they still taste great. So I'm a big fan of that. The other kind of holiday tradition I have around this time is going to the drugstore and buying those 100, is it 10,000 gram bars, 100 gram bars, those red
Yeah. 100 gram bars.
100 gram bars. You can't get it except for Halloween, and
Is that true?
I just can never find them in the store. Like, if you
Wow.
look at the store display at the checkout, it's never like those bars. Maybe you can get a whatchamacallit, which is also fairly rare, but as
Those
far
aren't
as
as good though. Those aren't as
yeah,
good as 100 gram bars.
yeah,
100 gram bars have got like that crisp in it
yes,
that's like, I love a good crisp.
the crisp and then the caramel. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's only a thing you can really get around Halloween. And so I may have a bag or 2 or 3 that I get. And it's a seasonal thing, and it brings me happiness.
Yeah.
So
There's that time at like the beginning of October every year where you start to see all the Halloween candy out. I mean, honestly, it's probably out by like beginning of September. Like, who am I kidding? But once they get through like all the back to school crap and we're on to like Halloween as the next activity, you start seeing like all the giant bags of candy. And I am for sure guilty of like, I usually never have candy for like trick-or-treaters because I live in an apartment, but I always buy myself a bag of candy like at the start of October. Like it doesn't even make it to Halloween. It's like, let me start with this to kick off the month. And then the one good thing is that by the time you make it through the bag, you're like, I kind of need a little break now. Like,
yeah.
so it's almost like, you feed the addiction and then you're like, okay, but now I need like an apple again. So
Yeah.
apple picking it is.
Yes, then it's a good balance. Maybe that this is all for a reason. I agree with you. After I get done with my third bag, I am kind of sick of these 100 gram bars, and then I'm just ready for it the next year. It takes me like
Yes.
9 to 12 months to kind of gear back up again to be ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. I know you get it. Well, and if you can't find the 100 gram bar all year, it's just something to get excited about.
Yes, and the first spotting is a big deal. It's like Cadbury eggs around the Easter time, where when you see them kind of early, you're the one that kind of puts it out there either on social media or amongst friends, and then everyone knows now it's the season and everyone rushes to the drugstore. But that first person is congratulated because it's like, thank you for letting everyone know. Thank you for your service.
Yes, exactly. I always look forward to it's not the it's when you see that first person post about like the pumpkin spice latte on Facebook where they'll be like, guess what's back? Like I love seeing that post because then of course it inspires all the conversation of like, oh, but it's only mid-August. Like, but I love it even more when it comes to the holidays because without fail, there is always the argument about the design of Starbucks holiday cups.
Yes.
And it's one of my favorite online arguments I look forward to all year long because as we've learned, nobody wins. You can never win. Like they can put pictures of like Christmas on there. Then people are like, oh my gosh, you're only highlighting Christmas. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. Then they will do like drawings of kids sledding and playing in the snow. Okay, this has nothing to do with the holidays. This is about winter. And then my favorite was like the year when they were just like, fuck you to everybody. And they made the cups that were just red.
Yes.
Like it was just plain red.
Yes.
And people were like, this is not holiday-ish. And you're basically praising the devil right now. And I just lost it.
It was like, how dare you have a plain cup that probably was economically, like feasible because it only had red on it. It's just hilarious.
But, yeah, there's just no winning.
Yeah. I mean, although red cups just remind me of red Solo cups, which brings me to a different
there you
place
go.
altogether. And maybe people are making that connection without realizing it, going like, this is just anti-holiday. It's just not
I
okay.
love that you went the way of like beer pong, red Solo
Right.
cups, and I went the way of like Satan in a cup.
Right. Satan in a cup is probably something people would buy, though. I would say.
I would.
Yeah.
Totally would. If somebody was like, come on by Starbucks or wherever and pick up your Satan in a cup, hell yeah. You think I wouldn't try that?
Pop-up shop idea. Anybody listening?
Yes. Satan in a cup. Well, okay, I think we've, exhausted our fall conversation for at least a little bit, but I'd love to talk about you and your book, and let's start with kind of your romance origin story. So, both like how you came into reading romance and also your journey as a romance writer.
My background is all over the place in terms of just reading and preferences. Like, I read anything and everything, not very fast, but I do read thrillers to historical fiction to rom-coms, obviously. And so when I do read, I don't like binge one type of thing. I just sort of like grab whatever almost is available. Especially when I was younger, I didn't really have very many opportunities to get books. We weren't really near any bookstores, and then the mall that had a bookstore didn't have very good selection, and then the library was very limited as well. So the first time I'd actually like picked up a romance, a book with romance in it, and I think I mentioned this in the other podcast we were in, was Interview with a Vampire, that I was like, this is strange. It's got a lot of things I like, but it's not something that my mom would let me read. But of course I read it, and it was in 7th grade, and I loved it. And I think it was in 7th grade. But in any case, then I just knew about books that would have romance in them. But it wasn't until later on where post-college that I was just reading for pleasure, and just able to read books that weren't like assigned to me, because again, my ability to read books it's just like the throughput is so slow. So I kind of took the baby steps into it by reading chick lit first. I guess what was deemed chick lit at the time. So you had the
whatever that means.
Devil Wears Prada to Bridget Jones and those books, and then kind of made my way to the 50 Shades world, and a little bit of just, and then Helen Huang's romances. Yes, and so I kind of just made my way over to writing and reading more romance, and now it's probably about 50% of what I am reading now.
Okay, that's pretty well. So keeping that in mind, are there any favorites, but either books or authors, that you can think of, or what are you reading now?
I'm reading a lot of books that haven't come out yet, so
I do that too, and so it's hard for me to be like, oh, let me recommend this book to you that comes out next March.
yes, and I also love books that are either like a women's fiction with romance, or romance that have a coming of age story that accompany it. So it's this blend usually that I gravitate toward. So I would say that the books that I've read recently and enjoyed were, The Heart Principle, of course, the Helen Huang's book that's coming, that released in August. That I got an early read of, so I'm really happy to have had that opportunity. There's a lot of books that I think fall in this kind of blend, and I would say Soulmate Equation, People We Meet on Vacation, Love Proof. These are all books that are these kind of meshing of a woman's journey and its character arc with a love story. I also recently read K-Pop Revolution, and that is a YA book that there is a love story in it, but it really is a coming of age story of a Korean American teenager. And it's a sequel to K-Pop Confidential, and it's by
Oh, that's
Stefan.
what it is. I knew it sounded familiar, and I was like, I don't remember Revolution though. I remember seeing the cover for K-pop Confidential.
Yes, and he wrote a book where it's the sequel, and Candace, has gone through this debuting experience and basically pushed back and said some things about the mega company that is overseeing everything. And this is sort of the aftermath, and she is auditioning again, or re-auditioning, or just trying to debut as a group now. And I don't know too much about the behind the scenes of K-pop, but this really is a good. And I know he had done some research and had actually interviewed and done some work in Korea to interview K-pop female band members. So I just thought it was just delightful. So that's the most recent read that I had. That's a YA book. But on the adult side, I read Fallon Ballard's Lease on Love. That is also probably a blend, but I would say it leans more romance. And it's about a woman
Okay.
who mistakes a dating app for a roommate app and swipes and
Oh
ends up
my God.
and ends up being paired with a roommate, and hilarity ensues. So that I just finished, and it was also delightful.
That is hysterical, and I'm looking at it on Goodreads, and it's described as beach read meets the flat share, both of which I've read and loved. So I feel like I'm going to really enjoy this. So that's out in February 2022. Okay, yes. Cool. Adding it to my list. I love that. I love anything that has to do with like apps, like whether it's a dating app or we're watching a character like invent a new app. Like so many times I've read a book, mostly romances, where the character will work in like app creation, and the app that they invent, I will think to myself, oh my gosh, why is this not a thing? Like, why is this not a real app out there?
Yeah, I've read recently, Kristen Rockaway and Sandhya Menon have books about app creation. Alicia Rai as well. So yeah, there's a lot of books that center on this. It is funny though, because the books, I mean, the apps, as you said, are these really fun, great ideas. Yeah. And I do wish that there were people out there just investing and creating these apps too.
It's true. Do you have like in your mind, is there an app that doesn't exist that you wish did exist?
Yes. I complain about this all the time, which is I wish there was an app where if you bookmarked a restaurant or a place to see and you just open up a map app, it just shows you what those highlighted things were, even if you hated it. Because that's also just as important. Is like, I had this terrible restaurant experience 5 years ago. I don't want to eat there again. But I don't remember, like, I want to know that as well. Or this person says that this restaurant is good to try out on vacation. I'm not going to vacation there anytime soon, but I would like to know. And as soon as it's there, just drop it somewhere. And then when you open up maps, it just has a note there that has whatever is attached to it. That's my dream.
That would be very, very handy. It's like it's actually, in Portland, we just had this thing a few weeks ago called Portland Burger Week, which I was like a little upset I did not find out about until halfway through the week. Otherwise, I would have been eating my weight in burgers for a solid week. And when you clicked on their like interactive map, it took you straight to Google Maps, where all of a sudden, all these little hamburgers would pop up that would show you where all the places were. And even though the week is over, I still have all those hamburgers like on my map. And it made me think about how I wish on like Google Maps, which is where I save all the places that I want to visit, eat, shop at. I wish there were more options for like the symbols that you could use. Like they give you, love it. Save it for later, or you can give it a star. I'm like, but I want symbols like that tell me what it is. Like I want like a little record that tells me this is a record store. I want, I have the hamburgers now, obviously, or like ice cream, or for hiking, like maybe there's like a little tree symbol. Yes. So Google Maps, man, you're lagging. Like what's going on?
Agreed. And even if it's just hamburgers to start, I just lay down hamburgers, thumbs up, thumbs down. That's a start.
It's true. I'm with you. I think during my interview with Georgia Clark, I mentioned, because I know that she's a big fan of cheese, I mentioned that I wish there was like some sort of dating app that where people could like interact based off of like the food they like and like connect on like, hey, I'm making a cheese board tonight. Who wants to come over and have cheese? But know that it's not like creepy. I
Yes.
just like, I literally got a message the other night from a guy that all it said was, wanna make out. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is what we've come to. Like, this is romance today, is wanna make out at 11:25 at night when my ass is dead asleep. Like, are you kidding me? No, I want cheese. I want a cheese platter and I want seduction. I don't wanna make out.
That is the new foreplay, I guess. Want to make out, period. Was it a question mark, at least?
You know what? There was not even punctuation now that you mentioned. He didn't even have a period. There was nothing.
Oh my God. At least it wasn't an exclamation point. That would have been like crazy town, you know.
That would have been like him telling me,
Yeah.
want to make out. Look at me. Here I am. But yeah, so I want more food themed everything in my life, which is a great segue into talking about your book because hello, delicious romance. So before we dive into too many details, and just so everybody knows, we won't be giving away any spoilers, but Suzanne, would you mind sharing a brief synopsis for And So We Meet Again?
At the beginning, you gave a really great introduction of saying it's about food and family and falling in love and also finding yourself. I always say it's a part coming of age, part love story. And it follows Jessie Kim, who is an overworked Korean American female investment banker. And from the first scene, she is laid off on Zoom and has to figure out, you know, do I stay on Wall Street or do I figure out a new career? So she decides to move back home to save money to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. And of course, while she's home, living with her Korean parents in her childhood bedroom and running an errand for her mom at the grocery store, at the Asian grocery store, she runs into her childhood nemesis, Daniel Choi, who is the golden child and Mr. Perfect. And she can't, this is like a middle school nemesis. And when she sees him, she's like, great. And now you're hot. And so, like, and then I won't do any more spoilers, but that is basically the gist of the story, where she has to figure out what she wants to do and also what's she going to do with this Daniel guy now that he's also in the same town.
Well, and to be clear for everybody, it is, I mean, I very much would describe it also as like a coming of age story, romance, or like re-coming of age, because this is an adult woman. This is not by any means like a young adult coming of age 17-year-old. Like, this is somebody who what do I usually call it, is like fresh start romance. Like that's at least how it is for me, is I think of it as like somebody having a fresh start, new lease on life.
Yes, that's exactly right. A new lease on life. And I think a lot of people can relate to having to start over again, especially these days. There is a component of food, as you mentioned, which I can't not talk about, where her, when she gets home, she decides to restart her YouTube Korean cooking channel. It's a cooking fusion channel, and starts a new show. And again, no spoilers, but let's just say her mom walks on and does a cameo, and then the show takes off.
Which, I mean, as somebody who's spent like the last year watching a lot of like YouTube and TikTok, I can say would be very real. I mean, the amount of videos I've watched where, you know, kids or even adults are like filming their parents doing funny things, the millions and millions of views and likes that they get is just beyond. But I'm wondering, and I don't know if we talked about this during our Reader Seeks Romance episode, and that is, was this a book that you were writing before 2020, or was this kind of like a byproduct of like the pandemic?
It was fully written in the pandemic. I had pitched the idea, and it was so funny when I pitched the idea to my editor. it was such a poorly worded, thought through pitch. And it was over. I had gone to New York for a personal trip and met with my editor. And she's like, so what are you working on now that your debut book has been turned in and all that? And I said, oh, I've got this idea. It's I have a lot of friends who work in banking, and they told me their horror stories. So I want to write a book about that. And she's like, okay, so, is there a romance to it? And I was like, I think so. And it's just like, I was just feeling it out, like working through it. And when I had first thought of the idea of writing about a female banker who is dismissed and undervalued and undermined, I was thinking it would take place in a workplace. And at the time that I was talking to my editor, there was, everyone's in the office, and this is pre-pandemic. But then after the pandemic hit and I'm sitting there trying to write this book, I was like, how am I even going to write this book? Because there's no office as we know it anymore. At least not when I know the book will come out. And so the whole idea of her being in her job and you seeing things that are happening to her in the financial world and amongst her coworkers, her male coworkers, in a male-dominated work environment, that all just blew up. And then I was left without a book. And so I had to think, how am I going to keep the same concept and still incorporate themes of racism and sexism, but still have it be a comedy, and talk about, a woman who's trying to figure out her career. And luckily, I figured out a way to do it, but it took several starts and stops to try to figure out the first few chapters. But once I figured it out, and had sort of the work experiences be more flashbacks and then kind of come full circle at the end, that made it kind of work in how I had intended it to, but just a totally different way. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. But it was fully written in the pandemic. I remember starting it in summer of last year. Yes, that's right.
Wow.
And it was due in November of last year. I was like, how am I going to do this? But luckily, I was able to turn it in on time, roughly on time.
Good enough. I mean, it's out in the world now, so that's all that matters. Yeah. But no, I asked because I wasn't sure if it was like a conscious decision or not, but there were so many elements to this book that were so reminiscent of like what many people experienced during 2020, like losing their jobs either by choice or because of the pandemic, being relegated to either spending a lot of time inside at home, or even, I don't know about you, but a lot of my friends left New York, left Los Angeles, and moved back in with their parents at the ages of 28, 29, 30, I mean, and something that before the pandemic, I think was like frowned upon, which is a whole different conversation because it shouldn't be. You should live wherever you want, whenever you want to do it. But, and then just sort of like the whole idea with like YouTube and like creating content, like so much of this was like part of our pandemic culture and like to an extent still is today. And so that's why it really for me like rang true as like a story born out of like the pandemic.
That is all true, and all of the things that are nods to the pandemic life are all intentional. So I was also therapeutic to write about because this was summer and things were still in lockdown. So I remember thinking like, what can I talk about that I think in a year will be kind of funny? Like, it's not funny now, but it might be funny later. And so just her her business idea is based on hacking meal kits to take these prepackaged dinners, and when you're sick of them, try to come up with some new Korean flavors or Asian flavors to make them kind of like a new dish. And that is one of her business ideas. And then she also supplements with Korean marinades and sells those as a product. And that was also from, an idea I had after my millionth, try at a meal kit and failed attempts at trying to cook something that I liked after I got sick of it. I was like, oh, all these things are getting old in their fridge, and what am I going to do with it? So I'd end up having to like hack it and try to make something, at least in pieces. I'll make a salad instead, even though this is not a salad actual meal, but I'll just cobble together some other, from some other meal kits.
Yes.
Then there's just the workplace. There's more an emphasis on Zoom. There is also just there's this early scene, and I remember when I wrote it, it was right after I got a grocery delivery, and she basically has a person who delivers groceries to her and gives special instructions in the checkout process. So this woman's like, "Are you sure this is right? Because this is the weirdest thing I've ever been asked to do." And she's like, "You know what? It's in the form." And so I just find that so funny, because any of the grocery delivery services, they do have this like, are there any special instructions? And I'm like, how far can you go with that? And so I took it to an extreme in the book. So I had some readers that thought that was amusing. And again, that's some of the funny things that can happen from the pandemic, when you have a lot of time on your hands and try to think of what's the most absurd thing that you could do with what you're given as your
without actually writing a story like about the pandemic. Like this is definitely not a story about pandemic life, but there are so many elements of this derived from pandemic life that you can like heighten as much as you want, because it's fiction.
Yes. And actually, in my young adult book that I also released this summer, Sunny Song Will Never Be Famous, I give a nod to the pandemic. It's post-pandemic life, and I give a nod to the quote unquote great toilet paper shortage. And
yes.
Yes. And I'm hoping by now we can at least laugh about how absurd that was.
Stealing it from work, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, whatever works for you.
Well, and so I'm glad you brought up the fact that, you've written young adult as well. And so I'm curious, between young adult and adult fiction, do you find that you gravitate towards one more than the other when it comes to writing?
I don't think I have a strong preference or inclination for one or the other. I enjoy both so much. I think with the young adult audience, there's more flexibility in some ways of, just
interesting.
Just to kind of see life as a new person would experience something. Whereas I think in adulthood, people have experienced life a certain way, even maybe some adult readers, and have their thoughts on how something should be, or like, a trope needs to be X, Y, or Z. And I feel like that is not limiting, but it is definitely more, it can be, I don't even know if formulaic is the right word, but it is definitely just like something you have to think about, is like people's life experiences to a certain point, and what your commentary is going to be about that, and what you're trying to do with your message. Is it to reinforce something? Is it to change minds?
Challenge it,
bring something to somebody's attention? And I find that sometimes with an older audience, it may not, be received the same way as a young adult audience.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do see where that can be both limiting and challenging depending on what it is that you want to say. And clearly, this is a book that, without giving away too much for people who haven't read it yet, I mean, there's discussions about sexism, there's discussions about racism, workplace discrimination. Like there's so much happening that is so real, and it's so much part of our lives today, and you really do, not you, but just the general you, fall into either you have learned something one way and become so accustomed to it that you are going to ride or die by it. Like, this is it. This is what I believe in, period. Or you have to consider what you're reading, watching, learning, and just sort of accept that maybe what you're hearing is challenging some parts of what you already know, and that's not a bad thing. Like, and that's sort of what I feel like the last couple years has been for me, is like, I know that as a cis het middle class white woman, there are definitely specific privileges afforded to me that are not afforded to everyone else. And I was very much raised in a household of like, treat everybody equally, and like that's a lovely idea. We can all agree that that is the ideal version of society. However, it is not the society we live in. And so I have felt very challenged the last few years, and it's been a process of unlearning and relearning. And I am so grateful that movies, TV shows, books, romance novels are challenging us as consumers to think about these things, because I, for one, welcome it. And because I think that we're always growing. We're always learning more things every year. Like if you settle into like one very specific way of thinking at the age of 25, you're going to have a very boring life, like for the next like 50, 60 years. So at least as far as I'm concerned, that's how I feel about it. But what are your thoughts as far as like kind of incorporating these like heavier topics into a medium like romance novels?
Luckily, the romance market and audience, as well as the young adult audience and market, they are the most, they're very progressive in wanting change and diversity and showing different points of view. So I've found that luckily I've sort of landed in the right place for the types of books that I want to write.
Right.
But as far as, I've already forgotten the question.
It's because I ranted for like 5 minutes about my TED Talk on classism. No, the question was how is it important, and how do you think writers can incorporate like some of the heavier topics into a genre like romance, which is known for being like on the lighter side, at least by people who don't read romance and don't know like what it has to offer?
For the most part, I write workplace comedies. And so what I am most interested in writing are these male-dominated environments where a woman has to find her way. And specifically, an Asian American woman has to figure out how to navigate this very male, hetero, white dude, frat boy type culture. So my debut book, Loathe at First Sight, focused on the gaming industry, which has officially blown up, I think, as far as there was a big lawsuit that just became very well known in the last few weeks, where the workplace culture is finally being highlighted as toxic and horrible. I mean, it's been that way all along, but finally it's gotten a lot of media attention and press, and a lot of people are caring now because it's an official lawsuit in the state of California. And the other industry that I focus on in So We Meet Again is the financial industry, and that stemmed from some of my friends over dinner. We were talking about where we worked and what kind of places we have worked in our past, and comparing them. And some of my banker friends, they're female, and they were just telling me about all the horrible things that they've had to encounter on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
And just hearing about it just made me sick to my stomach. But I was like, of course, I was like, I need to take on this challenge and put it in a book. And so I did. But both of the books, Loathe at First Sight and So We Meet Again, are handled so differently in terms of how I brought that to like that industry reckoning in my book to people's attention. It's hard to do humor when it comes to racism, sexism, to be perfectly honest, because nobody wants to hear. I mean, a lot of people don't want to hear it, but then it's also uncomfortable for a lot of people. So I've had to find ways to couch it in humor, in a way that I can deliver the message in a different way. And I'm hoping by doing that, I can change the overall conversation, so that I know people talk about it in the news and in media and private conversations, but hoping if I come at it at a different angle using humor. Honestly, it's my time in stand-up comedy that made me think that I can try something this big, to take on these big challenges where it's uncomfortable, but I still need to get the point across, and people uncomfortably laugh, and also laugh at what happens in the book, because they know it's real, and they know that these industries are perpetuating this type of hostile work culture.
Well, and I think stand-up comedy as an industry is another example of an industry that is very much dominated by like white male frat boy humor. So it's interesting that because of your background in stand-up comedy, you know, as an Asian American woman, that would be something else to kind of reflect on and like how you incorporate that into your books.
I think out of all I've written about the video game industry, investment banking, but I still think, as you're saying here, the most sexist, impossibly racist industry really is stand-up comedy.
Man.
I've just had so many shows where I'm the only woman on the show out of a lineup of 15 guys. As you said, they're all white and very angry. Usually. But then also there's this understanding amongst comics where, you know, when somebody goes on, you, especially if they're new or you haven't seen them, you kind of, you know, give them a shot. I mean, it's just like this in open mics, like you try to be a little bit nice. If you don't like them later on and you know they're a hack or whatever, people talk over them. But I found that when I would go up, people were talking and drinking and like having side conversations, completely dismissing me already before I went on the stage. And then so many times after I performed, whether it was an open mic all the way up to being a feature, I would get off the stage and these guys would congratulate me like, oh, I've earned their kudos. You know, like,
you lucky duck, you.
Yes,
Thank God that they approved.
You actually killed it, or you actually did great, or wow.
That word, actually, like anytime somebody uses the word actually in a compliment, it's not a compliment.
It's not a
just
compliment.
So everybody knows.
Yeah. And I heard that so many times. And it gets to you. And you know, and then the demographics, I think at the time that I was performing most regularly was 10 years ago. Yeah. And it was 95% male, I think, is where the industry was citing. Yeah.
And of the 5% that don't identify as male, I question how many of those people are also people of color.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think that's an even smaller margin within this industry.
Absolutely. And so it was a very hostile environment.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, honestly, I can count on one hand the amount of Asian female comics that I'm familiar with, and that's not to say that there aren't more out there. They're just not getting the time that or the recognition that they deserve. I will say I'm a big fan of comedy. I love comedy. Bo Burnham is one of my go-tos. I know he's been like really popular lately because of his special Inside, but one thing that I do love about Bo Burnham, and it's one of the ways that I feel like comics, if they want to, can talk about like race and sexism in their work, is that if you go back and look at his older stuff, even when he's like 20 years old, he's singing a song about that is poking fun at all the problems he must have as a straight white male. That is the name of the song. I mean, it's hysterical, but also like facts. And it's really, I think when you're like including yourself in on the, like, as long as there's like some self-awareness and like you're also including yourself in any sort of commentary like that, I always think that works better or like resonates more with me when I'm watching comedy, just because I'm like, okay, yes, you're making fun of this person, but you're also acknowledging that there's like at least some element of truth in there that applies to yourself too. So, but people who just like rag on everybody else, like that, I have zero interest in that comedy.
Yeah. Agreed. And then there are like go-to kind of topics that a lot of comics, especially when they start out, they think that they need to talk about. And then you grow as a comic and develop your voice. And then you kind of create your own stories. And it was just sad to see a lot of these comics that I started out with just not grow in terms of like a bigger world view. It was just always about dick jokes and
It's lazy. It's like the go-to, like it's that's sort of, I think, because we've accepted that as like, this is what comedy is dick jokes, body humor, men ragging on their wives, complaining about their children. Like, because we let that become a standard and we continue to laugh at it, that is sort of like what it has stayed at being. Like, it hasn't grown. And I think to some extent that's a lot of different industries. Like, I've worked in Hollywood, and I think that's very much a standard that's been set in the movie making industry. I think there's a lot of that you could apply to sort of like the book world that thankfully we're seeing, changing. But, why are we only talking about like diversity and romance in the last year or two? Like, why wasn't this a conversation amongst the masses 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Like, it's because we become so used to it and so just like, well, that's the way it is, that we accept it even if we don't like it. So, yeah, again, we're back to Kelly's TED Talk. Thanks for coming, y'all.
But related to that, I mean, you just touched on the whole fact that, the book world is changing, or at least talking about changing recently, and
talking about changing. There you go.
Trying to include more diversity and more voices that are haven't been heard before. And overall, I really have strong feelings about making sure that marginalized voices and characters should get books just not squarely centered on racial conflict or trauma.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that, even, people should be able to have happy endings too. Like, there should be books that show Asian American characters, Black characters, just Latino, Latina, just characters that have stories that need to be told, but it doesn't have to be centered on conflict and struggles and, poverty or whatever it is, that just publishing thinks they need to focus on.
I agree. And I feel the same way about, LGBTQ plus stories. Yes. I feel the same way about, as a fat woman, this is like really important to me when I see fat rep in romance novels or just novels in general, is does their entire story need to be about the fact that they're fat? Like, does their struggle need to be, oh my gosh, how will I find a man with all these extra curves? Like, no. Like, this is why the fat rep I love, is coming from authors who are mostly also self-identifying fat women and talking about like, well, no, she just like met some hot guy on vacation and they hooked up, like 40 Love by Olivia Dade, just so people know. And it's just, I don't want, for lack of a better term, I don't want a character's otheredness to be what is defining their character and defining their story arc in a story. That's not to say it can't be a major point of their story, because of course that's a part of your identity. Like, that's part of who you are. However, they can also have troubles with, their business. They can also have trouble with dating apps. It doesn't have to be so focused on what differentiates them from the, typical cishet white heroine. Like, it doesn't have to be that.
Agreed. And I wish, and I hope that we see more of those stories.
Me too.
Come out in the coming years, because it's I think a lot of people feel that way. It's just that the industry hasn't moved in that direction as quickly as we want it to.
Yeah. Well, then we go and we write books like So We Meet Again.
Yes. That's what we try to do.
I did, by the way. I don't know if you read reviews of your own books. I know a lot of people, couldn't care less. But I have to say, I pulled a few excerpts from Goodreads reviews of So We Meet Again, just because they made me smile. And they're all very positive, but let me give you a few. So this one comes from Helen Huang, who says, like all of Suzanne Park's books, So We Meet Again centers humor, depth, and the Korean American experience. Accurate. This one comes from Madison Warner Fairbanks, who says, a powerful and positive story with humor, romance, and family. And this one's my favorite. This one comes from author Emily Henry, who says, I just had such a nice time.
I try not to go on Goodreads or actually read any reviews. So thank you for letting me know those exist.
Yeah, now you know Emily Henry had a nice time while reading your book. That could be one of my favorite reviews I've ever read. It's just, I just had such a nice time. That's what we want.
That is really what you want. And I do want my books to be, I've thought about, how all the things that I read influence my writing. And I read a lot of thrillers and a lot of action type books. So I love more of a fast-paced book. So I'm always pleased when people tell me, oh, I flew through it, or I was able to read it very quickly. To me, that's maybe one of the biggest compliments. And so when I see those types of reviews, or I used to, and now I don't read them, but when I have people say, like, I sat down and read it all in one sitting, or like before I knew it, it was done and I had such a nice time or enjoyed it, I take that as the highest level of compliment.
Well, I will tell you honestly that this was what I call a one-sit read for me, or sometimes I call it a one bathtub read for me, because I love to read in the bath, and I will stay in the bath for like 2-3 hours and like read a book, like if I can. If I have the time to sit in the bath for 2 or 3 hours and read a book, like that is a perfect afternoon.
Yeah. You should do ratings based on the pruniness of your fingers.
Ooh, I like that. My mom, who, is a longtime supporter of the podcast, has said, why don't you rate your books? Like I do heart, heat, and humor ratings for the books right now. Although to be fair, I could do a whole other episode just on rating systems, because I just don't, it's all subjective. But she's like, why don't you rate your books like based on like boobs? And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, how would I? I'm like an A cup, a B cup, like, but then that's like emphasizing that a certain size is better than the rest. And she's like, or it could be like tits up versus like, I'm just like, I love that where you're going with this, Mom. Like, clearly you can see where my thoughts and ideas come from, but also how am I going to create a rating system based on boobies? But if anybody has thoughts, please let me know.
Maybe lift. That's the only thing I could think of.
Well, then she was like, maybe just number the boobies. Like, this one gets 4 boobies. This one gets 5 boobies. Where's the other boobie? Why are there only 5? Like, I don't know.
And can you do half boobie system ratings? There's a lot of questions.
3.5 boobies. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm not a fan of rating systems. I'm constantly changing the one we use on Boobies and Newbies, because I don't know what to do with it. I just don't know what to do. But again, that is a discussion for another day. In the meantime, I'd love to know what's up next for you.
I'm currently drafting a book, actually, and I'm having a great time doing it. So it's nice to have had some time off. I took a vacation, and then now I'm back to drafting, and I figured out like who these side characters needed to be. Some reason my side characters, for some reason, this one I think will be more about found family versus the actual like her birth family. So it was more important for me to figure out their voices and who they're going to be like. Nice. And so now that I've figured that out, I don't know if I tell you, it'd be more of a spoiler. But I'm thinking a family with two, a found family where 2 characters are, one is more like Aquafina, the other one is more like Ted Lasso. How are they all going to combine? I don't know, but it's fun writing it. So I'm having a great time writing this. And it's called The Do-Over, and it's about a woman who finds out as she's applying for jobs, she gets a job offer almost. They do a background check and they find out that she actually didn't finish her college degree. She's a few credits short, and she didn't know that. So she ends up having to go back to college and relive her senior year, and then finds out in the process that her TA is her old college boyfriend.
Ooh, okay.
Fun times. Yeah. And that was based on a nightmare that I have. That I keep waking up like in a sweat, in a panic, that I am taking this exam of a class that I never took. And that had plagued me for years. But as soon as the
Yep.
book deal announced, I stopped having that dream. So I don't know if I like psychologically fixed that. And whatever happens with this book, it doesn't matter because it solved my nightmare problem.
It's your own therapy. Like, it's your own like therapeutic way to process this dream trauma that you've been having, which I've had a similar dream where it's, you know, I grew up in theater, and so the recurring dream for me was that they like push me onto stage and it's like, okay, time to do the show, and I'm like, y'all, I don't even know what show we're doing. Like, not that I don't know my lines, I don't even know what show it is. Yeah. So I feel like everybody's had that sort of dream or some variation of that dream, and maybe that just means I need to write a book about it and just process it through my words.
And maybe you won't have that dream anymore. That ended up being the best byproduct of this whole thing at all. Like, forget like writer anxiety and imposter syndrome. Like, you know what? I've solved this nightmare problem, and that is worth its weight in gold. Yeah, so I'm writing that now. I am waiting on edit notes for my young adult book, which will be out next fall or late fall of 2022. That one is untitled currently, but it's about two teenagers who work at a mall. And they work at seasonal mall businesses. One is a photographer at Santa's Village. He works as a manager at the virtual reality North Pole extravaganza. And they're next to each other. And then their parents both work at rival fast food restaurants in the food court. One is a Korean restaurant. The other one's Chinese. And they end up finding out that the mall is going to close.
I love it. I love that it's not just them too. It's also like their families like are invested in this mall too.
Yes, and it's been a lot of fun to go to malls and try to eat mall food.
Hang out at the food court and do research.
Research, quote unquote. Corn dogs on a stick, multiple corn dogs on a stick with lemonade.
It's been a hot second since I was in a mall, like in general. But I always think of that there's that episode of How I Met Your Mother where they find out that Robin was like 18 mall. She was like discovered at a mall and became like one of those like singers, sort of like Tiffany, you know, from back in the day. And her song was "Let's go to the mall today." Like, so anytime I just hear like somebody's talking about the mall, that's like immediately where my train of thought goes, is that song.
That's a good song. You might have to learn it as your outro.
Yeah, that'll be the end of every show is we're going to the mall now. But to be fair, it would just be to eat. I'm with you. It's food court, first stop and last stop all the way.
It's also been interesting trying to research for what stores are universal, like a Claire's versus Spencer's Gifts versus, you know, just Sbarro's.
Oh, Spencer's Gifts. Right? What a gem. Oh my God. Spencer's Gifts was the place in our mall where I went to college where people would go and like college kids would go and like giggle because there'd be like penis pasta.
Yes.
And we all bought my roommates and I, before we graduated college, we wanted to do like a little photo shoot together. And we all bought like these hats at Spencer's that are like the disgusting neon trucker hats that all say something really terrible on them. And I just remember I was so upset because my dog like ate the snap off of mine. So like after college I could never wear it again. And it's honestly probably for the best because mine was neon pink and said, "All I do is fucking party."
And you need to mend that hat.
I know.
Or find it.
They anytime these pictures pop up on like my Facebook time hop, and I'm just reminded of the fact that at one point I owned a hat that said "All I do is fuck and party" on it. I can't. I'm just like, who was I?
I know who you were, and it was a neon on your head.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, terrible, but I love it. But yeah, Spencer's Gifts.
Spencer's has a special place in my heart for that kind of gift, right? Or that kind of thing you buy yourself. So it's been a fun research jaunt, trying to figure out what to make universal and what to make local.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited for both of those. Those both sound super fun. And I think I asked this during our Reader Seek romance episode, but I have to ask it again. And that is, do you ever have any thoughts or plans to write a romance set in the world of stand-up comedy? Because I feel like it's there and it hasn't been tapped.
Has not been tapped. I have actually told friends that this is one of the books I need to write. I don't know how it will manifest, whether it will be a murder book, but it might be.
Could be.
I know there's CSI episodes about stand-up comics who go missing. So I know that there's room for it in that world. But yeah, I definitely think I need to write about it. I think with over 10 years of experience and also having friends that, are still either performing or dropped out because of various reasons that relate to the sexism and racism in the industry. I would definitely love to write a book about it. I think there's room because nobody's really tapped into that, as you said.
No, and it's something that I would definitely love to read. Although now that you've mentioned like CSI, my head has immediately gone to like, oh, there should be a cozy mystery about like an improv team that's like getting killed off. So that might be something that I go and explore.
Yeah. You're welcome. See, let's just have this podcast to come up with wacky book ideas.
I'm here for it. I am here for all the brainstorming. And if anybody listening is like, ooh, she's got something there, send us a message.
Right. We'd be happy to talk. No, I like this improv one by one getting picked off idea. And then the question is like, at what point can the show not go on, right? Because you do
right, because then it's just like two of you just yes-anding each other back and forth.
We need to solve this mystery because we can't continue these shows, guys.
Oh gosh, well there you go. Food for thought is something to focus our efforts on in the future. But Suzanne, this has been wonderful chatting with you again, and I'm so excited for all the future projects of yours, but also So We Meet Again. If people have not read it, it is available now. It's a very fun one-sit read, as we've learned, or one-bath read, but it will also make you think. And I, for one, that's something that I am looking for in a romance novel or anything that I'm picking up, is just something that leaves me wanting to have a conversation about it with other people. And I think this is that book for a lot of people. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much. I've had some people from various book clubs tell me that it's been an interesting book to discuss amongst people who have had different work experiences.
What a great idea.
Yes, because people have worked in all types of industries, scaling from a very female-oriented and kind of dominated industry all the way up to somebody that was the only female in the boardroom. And and book clubs are such a mix of people too, and so from different backgrounds. So I've just heard some great discussions that have come out of it, and that makes me happy too, because that's really what I've always wanted out of my books, is to have people kind of talk about the realities of working in a male-dominated environment, but also think about it from a Korean American person's perspective. What's different versus their current, perspective.
Well, there you go. As if you didn't need another, reason to read this book. Pick it up for your next book club meeting. That's a great idea.
Or start a book club.
Yeah. Book clubs, virtual book clubs especially, like, saved my life in the last year. Like, that has become one of my favorite activities. So, I'm a fan. I think it's a great way to discuss, topics and characters in the books you read. And like Suzanne said, just see sort of like the connections that you can make with the characters, but also think beyond those. And we all have our own personal stories. All of us are unique snowflakes. And so it's a great way to just sort of like learn a little bit about each other as well. So, I think this would be a great book club pick. Well, Suzanne, where can all the people find and follow you across, all the different mediums? On
Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Suzanne Park, SUZANNEPARK, one word. And on Facebook, I am Suzanne Park Comedy, I believe is the extension.
Okay.
I couldn't give up the comedian name, or I morphed it and then suddenly just became a thing and I just left it alone. And so you can find me there. I actually just joined TikTok only because I didn't want somebody else to take my name.
Well, there you go. People can find her on TikTok.
You can find me on TikTok, selfishly squatting on my name. But one of my friends who is, a book talker, author type, he's like, we need to make your first video. So at some point, maybe in the next year, you'll see a video from me.
Maybe by the time this episode drops, like maybe there will have been some progress made on your TikTok. I'm looking forward to it.
Hopefully I'll have one by then, but we will see.
Nice. Well, thank you again. And, everybody go pick up So We Meet Again and get reading.
Thanks for having me. This was such a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.